Let's start with the breaking news, which I enter the caveat might not actually be news, but it is wall to wall in the United States media this evening that Donald Trump and Russia have been secretly away from the spotlight, negotiating a 28-point plan to end the bloody war in Ukraine. If it is true and if it succeeds, nobody will be happier than me and all of us here at the mother of all talk shows. This war, which should never have started in 2014, indeed earlier if you count the steady encroachment on Russia's borders by NATO since the beginning of this century. But in hot war terms, this war has now been going on for 11 years, and that's long enough for any war in modern times. The death toll has been of First World War dimensions. 1 million, at least, Ukrainians have been killed, hundreds of thousands maimed, and many of those permanently. 9 million Ukrainians have run away from their country and are living in your country and may very well not go home. 180,000, 190 Ukrainian servicemen have deserted, and that doesn't count the tens of thousands that are now prisoners of war. It has been a bloody disaster, a long, Somme-like bloody disaster, not on the same dimensions, but getting there. On this day, the Somme offensive was called off by the British, having, at the cost of getting 6 extra miles of Belgian territory. Have you seen Belgium? 6 miles cost almost 1 million Allied casualties, British and French and German. 1 million casualties for 6 miles of Belgium. That was the kind of war we thought we'd never see again, but the Ukraine war is turning out to be a mirror, at least, of that conflict. People in trenches, people cowering from drones that strike them and annihilate them with extraordinary precision and great regularity. That's leaving aside the missile strikes from both sides, but mainly from the Russian side, which has systematically eliminated Ukraine's air defense systems and systematically eliminated, one by one, the power plants on which their armed forces have depended. It's lights out in Ukraine. It was lights out even before the NBU, the National Bureau in Ukraine, National Bureau of Ukraine, which is now beginning belatedly to smoke out rampant corruption, the theft of hundreds of millions of dollars and euros and pounds, your dollars, euros and pounds, which has disappeared into the pockets of Zelensky and his criminal gang, which I remind you has long ago exhausted its democratic mandate. When I was saying these things, well, I was issuing Putin talking points. But now the Financial Times, the Economist, the Spectator, the New York Times, the Washington Post are all saying exactly what I have just said. Well, that makes them kosher, of course. And I just have to shrug off and bear all the insults and fake accusations that I was merely echoing Putin talking points when I told you that Ukraine was the most corrupt country in Europe before all this began. How corrupt do you now think it is that hundreds of billions of pounds, dollars, and euros have been poured in without auditing, without accounting, without even knowing if it touched the floor before it went, still shrink-wrapped in the boots of Mercedes and to the offshore resting places where it was intended to go all along. It's lights out in Ukraine, not just because of the corruption, not just because of the casualty rate, but because Donald Trump has very definitely tired of the conflict and tired of the yapping dogs in London, in Paris, in Berlin, and even more yapping in the Baltic republics, trying to inveigle the United States into a war that would make Vietnam look like a children's tea party, that would make the coming assault, if it happens, on Venezuela into the same thing. A war between NATO and Russia could only end one way, and that is in a blizzard of nuclear, possibly thermonuclear, possibly intercontinental thermonuclear warfare, and the end of the human race as we know it. And Trump knows it. And he has, it seems, finally beaten down the congressional yapping dogs like Miss Linda Graham and others. He's finally beaten down the military-industrial complex and the mass media controlled by the Biden Democratic Party, which is primarily responsible for the policy towards Ukraine over this last period, both as the vice president and then as the president from 2020. Joe Biden has a lot to answer for on the Judgment Day, which, looking at him, seems not that distant. The dark, dark days that lie ahead for the Zelensky regime may very well include the prosecution of some of the most important people, maybe including the most important person in Kiev. Certainly the head of the presidential office appears imminently to be going to be arrested. He has been given by my friend Che Bose, who knows what's happening in Ukraine better than almost anybody. He's given him 72 hours. So if the head of Zelensky's office is about to be huckled, how much longer can it be before Zelensky himself feels the breath of the Bureau of Investigation, that at American insistence, at Trump's insistence, is finally beginning to close down at least the most egregious examples. In the energy sector, $100 million theft. When we come to the defense sector, well, you can replace the word million with billions. These people have looted your money, and I told you so. And some of you told me that I was merely a mouthpiece for Vladimir Putin. Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. The 28-point plan may or may not exist, and if it exists, it may or may not be sufficient to end the war. But I've long thought that set-piece diplomatic encounters between Trump and Putin, with all the European lapping dogs in the anteroom, was not the way to peace. I have long thought that secret negotiations on the sidelines were the way to go. And as I say, if that is now what has happened, then sing hallelujah. Far too many people have died. Far too much treasure, including our treasure in the United Kingdom, has been burned on the battlefield of this war that should never have started in the first place. But if it does bring normalcy, what will normalcy look like? Well, according to leaks, the 28-point plan includes the complete evacuation of all of the Donbass by the Ukrainian armed forces. That includes all the places now encircled. That includes all the places now half occupied. And of course, a recognition that everywhere that is occupied by the Russian armed forces will henceforth be a part of the Russian Federation. It means that the Ukrainian army will have to be cut in half, that it will be limited in size to half of what it was at the beginning of this conflict. Well, there'll be a few conscript soldiers who have been press-ganged brutally all over the Ukraine, who'll be grateful indeed for that. There'll be many of the men, at least, amongst the 9 million Ukrainians living near you, in many cases living on you, who might come back to their country if they've only got half of the number of conscripts as they had at the beginning of the war. It requires the United States and other countries to recognize Russian sovereignty over Crimea, Russian sovereignty over all of the Donbas territories thus ceded, and guarantee, a better guarantee than Gorbachev got, I hope and trust, that the NATO powers will not only never recruit Ukraine into NATO, but will not be present in NATO at all. There are many other 28 points that I don't have time in the monologue to go into, but I'm sure that Chris Hedges, the foreign policy genius who should be running America's foreign policy, but who's coming on the mother of all talk shows in a few minutes instead, will provide further and better particulars. Let me move on to one of the other many big international stories. You know, when he said there were no Epstein files, when Cash Out Patel said that there is no credible evidence that Epstein ever trafficked young girls to anyone, when Pam Bondi went from having the files on her desk to claiming she had no desk at all and that nothing had ever been on it, when he went to the provision of fake empty binders given to influencers by the White House that they all held up to the cameras without telling anyone there was nothing inside them, when he went from that to saying it was all a Democratic Party hoax, he set in motion, did Donald Trump, convulsive, serious political earthquakes in his own political base that have not ceased to reverberate. The tectonic plates have been shifting ever since. And we've reached the stage where now Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was Trump's representative on earth after he was cheated in the 2020 election, when they were trying to put him in jail, Marjorie Taylor Greene was his representative on earth, as the Pope is the representative of Jesus Christ. That was Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is now being called every name under the sun, but the most wounding must be his dubbing of her as Marjorie Traitor Greene. Who and what has she betrayed? She has remained faithful to the campaign promises that Donald Trump has now repeatedly and excessively violated, and yes, hate to use the word Donald, betrayed. It's you, Donald, who is the traitor. You are the traitor to the people you conned into voting for you by implying or explicitly stating that you were a human hand grenade that they could toss into the deep state bunker, and that you would drain the swamp, that you would lock them up, that you would find the people that rigged the election in 2020, that you would find the people who were behind the 2 assassination attempts on you, and yet your deep state, your swamp, are the ones who are most dedicated to continuing to defy the public's unanswerable demand that they should know, they should have transparency on all of these things. Transparency which you promised. So it ain't Marjorie Taylor Greene, it ain't Massey, Congressman Massey, Thomas Massey, who scored a magnificent result, along with Ro Khanna and with the support of Senator Rand Paul, as Trump now describes him in writing. I mean, what's that about? Is he not a senator? Why have you got senator in inverted commas? Do you even know the English language? Do you even know what inverted commas in a sentence mean? It's not them that are the traitors, Donald. It's you who betrayed them and who betrayed everybody. On everything, from Epstein to Venezuela, to all the new wars that you said you never would start but have, to all the new wars that you are currently threatening to start and have assembled an entire task force in the Caribbean with a plan, a cockamamie plan, to invade a vast semi-continental country called Venezuela, which consists of mountains and forests and forested mountains, as well as the alleyways of the big city where millions of Ukrainians lie in wait for your invasion force so they can turn it into a Latin Vietnam. Now, Nicki Minaj, who she is what I was saying when my good wife told me today that Nicki Minaj had blundered into the Nigerian imbroglio. You've got to hand it to Trump when it comes to pretexts. He says that Venezuela is a narco center when the narco center is in Florida, where he lives. And where he lived cheek by jowl with Epstein, but that is, of course, another matter. He says that Greenland does not belong to Denmark just because a Viking ship once landed on it, that it instead belongs to the United States, which was not founded when Greenland was already a part of Denmark. They didn't even land a Viking ship as their claim to it. But perhaps the most ridiculous of his pretexts is that he needs to invade Nigeria, to quote him, all guns a-blazing, to protect Nigeria's Christians from the hideous terrorists of Boko Haram and other fanatic groups. I don't have time to dissect that issue entirely, but let me just say this. Nigeria is a country of almost 250 million people. If you invade it, no matter how many guns you've got blazing, your men will leave dead in boxes in unprecedented numbers, not seen since the Vietnam War. Number two, half of the Nigerians are Muslims and half of them are Christians. And they don't live separately, they live next door to each other. The conflicts involving the likes of Boko Haram have been fueled by the United States of America and its obscene relationship to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Africa as in the Middle East, which came to its fruition in the Oval Office, where the former deputy head of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, so-called President Jolani, was being sprayed with Trump perfume, laughingly, by you. Boko Haram have killed more Muslims than they have killed Christians. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, but make it a peace pipe. Why don't you? I'll be right back with the aforementioned Chris Hedges. Stay tuned.